Well, welcome everybody. This is the Georgia Prison Watch podcast, Thursday night. It is August 10th, and have we got a show for you? I'm here. I'm Susan Sparks Burns, and I am with my co-host Brian Randolph. Brian, you with us?
I'm here.
Okay, this ought to be an interesting podcast and quite a good one. Tonight, everybody, you probably are aware we've got a couple of guests. Brian's going to introduce our guests in a moment, but for right now, I'd like to give you a little bit of news that we've got, some of which is news today. Um, the There is a boil water uh, advisory at Wheeler right now, and one of our members is contacting GDC about that because nothing had been done as of close of business today, and that boil water advisory I think went out around 5 o'clock. So we'll hope that that's taken care of. Um, by providing water and so forth. This is a problem with a well that is contaminated, so this does have to be sanitized and brought back online. So it could be a couple of days there. Um, Everyone may be aware that there is a new warden at Pulaski as of yesterday. Her name is Karen Flowers, and she has been the warden over at Lee State Prison. She was the deputy warden of security there for quite a while and then became warden and has made this move to Pulaski. I think that this is a really positive thing to have happened. We don't know much of the history of what has gone on in the last few days at Pulaski, but it's for the whole last year. There have been a number of problems. So it's refreshing to see that there's a chance of change there. Let's see. We understand that there has been a death at Macon today. All that I have heard is, well, two things. It happened in the hole in H2 and that it was a white guy. I have not gotten any additional information. Brian, how about you?
No, I haven't. People's been asking, but I don't really know, but
Yeah,
about what was put out, so I don't know.
yeah. So we don't like to put too much out there other than what has been confirmed. And that's what we know at this time. We'll get you that information as we get more of it. Something that I brought up last week, I want to remind you of a couple of things. As of August 1st, we have a new update on the facilities directory. And we also have that we'll be making available for you as you need them, phone numbers for the key players at each of the prison facilities. Today we went live with the Telfair cell phone numbers since they weren't answering their office phones. So a day early, but oh well.
Well, let me jump in on that real quick. I had nothing to do with that whatsoever. So
No, he did not. I made a decision and went with it. And frankly, the person who was desperate for help was able to reach someone and got the problem taken care of. Cell phones are amazing things. So I know we weren't going to do it until Monday, but oh well.
I would like to be a fly on their wall.
Absolutely. That'd be 34 walls we'd have to be the fly on. Did want to let y'all know we mentioned last week that we are moving forward with our letters of intent to sue. This has to do with two issues. One is mortality records, which are being withheld at this time, and also the issues with the cages being used in Georgia state prisons. Both letters of intent have been put in the mail. They're certified mail, and there is a cost to that. We told y'all last week we have a budget of about $1,000 for this, which we've received 176 on, and we use 76 to send certified and 24 on office supplies. So these things are expensive, and we're making that ask again. Please donate. I know that you are seeing a Cash App number going up across the screen. Please donate, and also share the broadcast. There's no way for us to reach others without you being the link in the chain.
Yep, that's right. And we definitely need your support. As Susan said, and I'm normally long-winded, but as you can tell tonight, Susan is guiding this ship. So I won't be very long, but I kind of wanted to touch on that very briefly. And Susan alluded to the intent to sue has already been sent out. We sent them out Monday morning. And, we're not backing down when it comes to this. This is very important. People are dying in their cages, and, they're withholding records. We requested the mortuary report for the entire month of July. And they sent us some and didn't send the rest. And, they told us, it would be 10 days, I believe. So, they're playing games. So, I think I said it last week, the only way that they will understand is, the courts are going to have to make them understand. So we're definitely following through with that. The intent to sue is for 30 days. They have 30 days to make those changes. And then, we're going to go to federal court, and we're going to let them handle it. And I have faith that they will. So we definitely need your support. Every penny goes to, the legal fund and what we're trying to do with preventing deaths. So I'll get off of that and go ahead, Susan.
Okay. Brian, while you're there, would you go ahead and introduce our guest today?
Yeah, so it's not really much of an introduction because I didn't plan or anything to introduce them. But as you can see on your screen there, we have Cleo and Michael. I guess I'll let them kind of introduce themselves a little bit. And one thing I want the listeners to kind of understand as we get into this conversation is that, we haven't talked about any of our subjects with them. And I know Michael is a former corrections officer, and I know that Cleo is a former mental health case manager at a prison in Georgia. So very glad to have both of them tonight. I told them before we got started that, people always tell us that, we can't believe the inmates, they're in prison, and that, they have every reason to lie because they're in prison. Well, these two people ain't in prison. They've never been in prison. They have worked in a prison. So tonight you'll get to hear what they have to say, and you'll be able to hear from their point of view some of the major issues that's going on in the Georgia Department of Corrections. And I just, I told them to, feel free to talk about whatever they want to talk about, to, let everyone know what's going on, and we have some questions that we're going to ask. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to go through those as Susan and, they are talking, and we'll try to ask them some questions. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and jump into this because I think this is a very, very, very important show. As I said, we now get to hear a different perspective, and, we get to hear about some stuff that maybe we don't know and that you don't know. So yeah, let's jump into it.
Okay, I've prepared some questions, and of course, these are from my perspective. I've been a corrections advocate now since 2017. And over time, some of these questions have festered, it would be a right word, and others are things that have come up as time has gone on. But The first thing I'd like to ask you both is what was the biggest surprise to you about going to work at Georgia Department of Corrections?
And either one of y'all can take that first, and then you can introduce yourself as well before you get the question.
Okay. Cleo, if you want me to, I'll go first. I
Go
don't
ahead,
mind.
Michael. You can go first.
Okay. So my interaction or career or whatever you want to call it with the GDC began in 2000, and I went there as a college student who was studying criminal justice, and I wanted the real world experience. Um, and so when I went into it, I was very naive, full of classroom ideas, all the different theories that you learned in class, all the different things. And I remember one of my professors telling me, he said, your experiences with the DOC is going to teach you everything I can never teach you in this classroom.
Mm.
He said, try not to let it change who you are, but you need to understand you're never going to be the same person again. So that he was true to his word. I worked in facilities for 4 years. GDC still handled adult felony probation back then. So after 4 years in facilities, I transitioned into felony caseloads, working in the metropolitan Atlanta area as well as in rural eastern Georgia. And then I also spent another 3 years working with local agencies. And so all I can tell you is starting off, I was very naive. I was full of ideals. And then, as we get into it and you ask questions, I'll tell you how the rest of the experience shaped me.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Cleo?
So, I have a much different experience. So I actually grew up, my mom worked in the prison system, in a different state. So I kind of grew up around the prison environment and like having a parent kind of grow up in that environment. I myself worked in a prison system in a different state for 3 years, about 2.5 years. So then coming to the Georgia prison system, it's like a night and day to the previous prison system I worked in. Much more violent. I just kept thinking like there needs to be more rehabilitation done. There needs to be more programming. Like, why aren't they in school? Like I was like always like the state I came from, like if you didn't have your GED, you went to school. Everyone had a job. Like they kept them busy doing things. So it was just really a shock to me when I got here, and I'm like, why are we just letting like the ideal time? I can't remember like the saying now, but like, we're like, they're not doing anything. Like, so if we don't give them something to do, they're just going to sit around and get in trouble. So it was just a very different experience. Like, I just was like, why are they just sitting here? More violence, more barbaric, I guess would be a good word. I'm not saying the prison system I worked in before was like Camp Rock or anything. Like it had its own struggles, and like they do a lot of unnecessary things, but compared to Georgia, it's much better. So that was kind of my first impression.
Wow. I wish I were surprised at both, but I'm not. Golly. One of the things I bring into this from my work history is many years working with SOPs and with documentation that prove that you not only said what you did in the SOPs, but that you proved that you did what you said through documentation. And I see very little of that in GDC, it's my observation at least, that there's a lot of pencil whipping going on. I know y'all know that phrase,
Yep.
but
hmm
yeah, is there adequate training on procedures themselves?
I can tell you from my experience as an officer, when I first came into the DOC, you got a 4-week crash course of formal training that they crammed as much as they could into 4 weeks. You got maybe a month or month and a half of OJT before that as a cadet.
Mm-hmm.
And then, once you graduated from BCOT, here's your badge. You might be on shift as later that day after your graduation ceremony, or if you were lucky, the following Monday. And I can remember my supervisor telling me, all right, you graduated from training, you did really good. All that means exactly squat. Forget everything that you learned, and we're going to teach you how we do it. And, I was taken aback by that a little bit. I was like, but I mean, that's the training. It's supposed to be that way across the board. Again, young 20-year-old me coming in there full of ideals, oh, we have to follow the rules. We have to do it this way. It has to be step by step by step. Um, he's like, yeah, we're going to do it this way because here's how the warden wants it ran. So, yeah, you got your book learning. Now we're going to teach you how the warden wants it. How the warden wants it is how they get it.
And yeah, we would witness that. Like, so we would go to the dorms as mental health counselors, and you would see the cadets in there, and you see the officer say, okay, if they ask you, this is how you're supposed to do it, but this is how we really do it. So that still happens today.
Okay. Again, not surprising considering the side of it that Brian and I see. We're coming up on the second anniversary of the DOJ announcing their investigation. And what I always hear about when the DOJ is getting ready to go to a facility, they what we hear about is lots of painting, cleaning, and repairs. But
Oh, yeah.
the DOJ is not assessing painting and cleaning and repairs. They're assessing violence and the inhumane treatment, the inhumane conditions. Is there any, a, does the DOJ, I mean, does the GDC actually recognize that the DOJ is looking at something very different than they're trying to present by painting?
So I can't speak for when I was there, like I worked there during like when DOG came to my facility, and like we presented like the best stuff. So like it was like, hey, like we're gonna show the DOJ like the best stuff. We're not gonna show them like all of this bad stuff. So we're going to take them to the better dorms.
Mm.
And we slapped all that lipstick on that pig. And then we took them to the best dorms. And we didn't show them like the months where we had the 19 stabbings in the specific dorm, and we didn't take them to that dorm. We took them to the better dorm. And we didn't let the certain inmates talk to them. We let the inmates that are on the warden's payroll talk to them, the ones that get the goodie bags and the ones that work for the warden or whatever, talk to them. We didn't let the inmates who are going to tell the truth talk to him.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, she's not kidding. If you had a big inspection come in, I can say during my tenure at the facilities I worked at, we were very fortunate that we never really had to worry about a Department of Justice investigation. However, if commissioner, deputy commissioner, facilities division director, your field area managers, if they were coming through, it was very much, all right, make sure the floors are waxed, make sure, anything that's broken looks like it ain't broken.
Mm-hmm.
unserviceable uniforms as far as things our inmates said. I mean, everybody got a fresh set of uniforms. Everybody got a new blanket. Everybody got a, good looking everything. But as soon as, the brass was out the door, we were taking everything back up. That, and there was, in some ways, I think I was fortunate in that, we, it was a much different department then than what it is now. I can tell you that use of force was very heavily scrutinized. Like, if you used force on somebody, you better have a doggone good reason to do it. And you better be able to, your documentation. But I also think the facility I worked at and who our leadership was, they were very much on the ball that, one, you'd like to think they just wanted to, treat people humanely and decently, but I also think to some degree they didn't want, the feds or internal affairs or anybody else in, playing in their sandbox. So
I totally get that. Is there practical training on de-escalating violent situations? Is that an impossibility? I know I must sound so naive. I'm sorry.
I mean, it would be not if they had the staffing. I mean, when you have like one officer for 200 inmates, it's nearly impossible, because like if you can get to a situation soon enough and de-escalate it, yeah, you can. But when you got one staff member for 200 inmates and you don't get to that situation in time, that one person or that one inmate's going to rile up everybody. And you figure it's hot, there's no AC, that situation can get out of hand really quickly. And that staff member's overworked, tired. They're doing the job of at least 8 people because you should have at least 2 people to a building. Well, they're covering one person for 8 people. So their temper's already short. It's not an excuse. It's just what it is. And so they're not going to respond in the best way either. So it's just a powder keg for disaster. And they're not typically trained the best in de-escalation. So, I mean, you would like to think, and then plus you got to look at what's the rapport like between that inmate and that offender, or that inmate and that officer. Did that inmate jack on that officer 2 days ago? Is that officer holding a grudge because that inmate has, jacked on that officer? Has
Yeah.
that inmate jacked on that officer before? So there's just a lot of dynamics that go into play there.
Yeah.
I've seen some officers be really good at handling, a whole dorm of 100 inmates and de-escalate a lot of things by just being like, all right, guys, knock it off. We're not doing this today. And I've seen it go sideways really quickly with some officers.
Yeah.
Hey, let me ask you this, Cleo. This is for you, and I was looking at some of our notes when we spoke last week, and something that I wrote down, and I want people to that's listening, or we'll go back and listen to this. Something that stuck out to me when we were talking, it was the one staff member for 4 buildings, and and I want to say that I want you, because you have not long left from working at a facility, but tell our listeners how real that actually is, because they hear us say it, and we know how grossly understaffed the GDC is. But for someone that's I won't say recently, but has been there within
The last year.
Just touch on that, because I think that's very important to hear that coming from someone that actually that worked there. When you told me about the one staff member for 4 buildings.
So when I started, we were at like 1 staff member per building. And when they're fully manned, it's supposed to be 4 per building. And in a building where I'm at, in the building, it's 100 inmates per building. So it's supposed to be like 1 officer per 50 inmates. because it's going to be like 2 on the A side, 2 on the B side. And so when I first started there back in 2020, it was we were averaging about 1 staff member per building, and then 2 in lockdown. So 1 on A side, 1 on B side. And so when I left, it was down to like 1 for every 2 buildings, and then 1 in lockdown. So like A and B had 1 officer, C and D had 1 officer, and so on. And so I recently spoke to a friend of mine who still works there, like within the last month, and she said right now it's like A, B, C, and D has like 1 officer. So that's like all of our Gen Pop dorms, all the Gen Pop dorms have like 1 officer. And so, and like and having the understanding, like the way that facility is set up is like there are gates, like, so you have the door to the dorm, and then you have like a gate to get out of the building, and then you have a sidewalk, and there's a gate, and then there's another gate to get out of another gate. So like if something were to happen, there's like several gates to get through just to get from building to building.
Yep.
So there's one on any given day, there's 1 officer for 100, 200, like 400 inmates. Yeah. And on night shift, it had been that way for a long time. Like, I mean, probably almost the entire time I worked there, they were running like 1 officer for every 4 buildings. So I'm sure I'm sure it's even worse on night shift.
Right. Michael, you got anything that you want to add?
I mean, I can tell you that, back when I worked there, they were understaffed, but they had more staffing than they have now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we had, the control rooms were manned. You had somebody on the A side, somebody on the B side, and sometimes we even had a utility officer that rode between the 2. You had a supervisor, available, backup supervisor. I mean, if there was a situation, you had enough. And I remember, I think for the units I worked in, I mean, the most, it was about, I'd say we had about, for the A side and the B side, it was about 200 total inmates. But you had 2 to 3 officers there who, were trying to keep things moving, plus supervisory staff. I remember, the towers were actually manned. You had people that, could open the gates for you. As some friends of mine like to volunteer inside facilities, I've had a chance to do some volunteering since my tenure with GDC. And I mean, you look and there might see 5 or 6 people show up for work at a closed security facility.
Yep.
And then, if you're going and volunteering, if you're lucky, you get an officer to escort you in there at the start, and then you're in there doing your volunteer work with your inmates until they come back to get you, which might be on time. It might be at 9 o'clock at night, and you were supposed to be out of there at 6 p.m.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because, they had a situation not long ago, and Susan probably knows the date and time. Well, not the date and time, but she probably knows the date and exactly what facility it was at. But, it's funny that you mentioned that, because there was a situation just not long ago where somebody actually came in for visitation and was actually either locked in a bathroom or locked in a closet at one of these facilities. Susan, do you know what I'm talking about?
It was Wilcox, and it was a weekday because their loved one was in the hole, and so they had a special visitation. It was a woman and her husband who went in to see their son, and they got locked in with their son for like 6 hours while there was a riot in another building and life flights. And the last thing I think anyone was thinking about was these parents who were locked in another building while they were having life flights.
Mm.
But that was, I believe that was maybe February of this year, February, March this year.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's funny, Michael, that you mentioned that, because, it's happening everywhere, all across the state where, how do you let something like that happen? Like, but I guess it goes back to, the understaffing, that they just have all over the state.
We used to get locked in the dorms with the inmates as contractors, because we were contracted by, our company was contracted by the GDC, so we aren't technically like state employees, so we were supposed to be escorted by an officer when we would go to the dorms to see like the mental health patients. And so like if we would go to see like our level 3 inmates, and we'd be staying there, we'd have to go in and do like our group with them or whatever, and the officers would just lock us in there, and so we would be standing there trying to get out, locked in a dorm with inmates, and the officer would be like, well, I'm a female, you're a female, and it's like, but you're an officer, it's a difference, there's a difference. And we'd be just standing there beating on the door until an officer came to let us out.
How disheartening is this to deal with the understaffing every day? I mean, it's one thing to have an exceptional situation, but tomorrow you're going back and it's going to be more of the same.
Mm-hmm.
Does that wear on you to know that you're not going to have help I don't know, it would worry me, but I fret by nature.
I mean, I felt like in that time, like I knew like that's where I was meant to be, and I felt like there were times like I just knew like that's just where I needed to be, and I was like, then there were glimpses of like I just need to make a difference where I can. And so that's just what I did. I tried to make a difference where I could when I could.
Yeah, to grow where you're planted.
Yeah.
Wow. It kind of goes back to something Michael said earlier, but regarding the cadets, is this a good practice to have the cadets in there? I can sort of see the practicality of it, but they have had, when they're still cadets, they've had no training to speak of.
Well, they go through like 2 weeks of like pre-training, and then they like I'm almost certain they go through like 2 weeks of like classroom training, then they do their cadet stuff, and then they go to VCOT. So they have some classroom training.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it sounds like it's improved. And I put improved in air quotes. I think our pre-training was 2.5 days. And then, here goes stand a post with this officer. Just make sure nobody's killing each other. And there you go. Watch everything this officer does. And it's just, basically you're just waiting for a training slot to open up. I do remember one time they put us in a room and handed us the big SOP binders and said, "Here you go, start reading."
Mm-hmm.
I think, there was a time when they were trying to make the training better, because there was a mind frame of, it's prison, it is what it is. Then it was, hard beds for hard heads. Then it was, who are we mad at? Who are we afraid of? If we're just mad at them, let's try to help them. If we're truly afraid of them, let's put them somewhere where they cannot harm society. I do remember that, there were educational requirements. If you did not have a GED, it was on your release checklist. If you wanted, any chance of getting out on time or making parole, you had to get your GED. You had to attend your classes. a big shout out to the counseling and care and treatment staff because they were, down there in those dormitories every day, um, making sure that the officers were treating inmates fairly, um, making sure, you know, because I worked in a facility that housed mental health inmates, um, making sure that, there were fans, there was ice, um, and making sure that, ice was given on a regular basis because the way the heat and the medications and the
Mm.
different conditions were interacting, that's something that we couldn't leave it up to chance. We had to take care of them. It was a different focus, which is why, I look now and I'm just like, how can things have deteriorated to the point they've deteriorated? Because that's not how it was. That's not how we were trained to be.
Well,
Um,
sorry.
go ahead.
I think part of the problem is that there's the 3-day required like mental health training. They're not getting that. There's just not the staff to be able to send staff to that. So you're having people go in and they're seeing mental health as they're seeing people act out as mental health and they're seeing that as it's a behavior we need to fix when it's instead of a symptom of a mental health issue that we need to treat. So that's one thing. We're seeing people who are faking mental health to try to get transfer or to get protection because they think, oh, and I saw this a lot, like, oh, I'm mental health free, I'm mental health free. I need to get to this dorm because I'm having trouble on the GP side. Well, level 3 is not um protective custody. That's not how this works. And then you're seeing like an uptick in like the usage of like strips, and strips comes with like its own psychotic thing. And so people will do strips and they'll get high, and people like, oh, well, he's got schizophrenia because he did strips. Well, no, he doesn't have schizophrenia because he did strips. He's used drugs. Like, it's not a mental health issue. It's because he did drugs.
Can I stop you for
Yeah.
just a second because you're touching on a very important part, and we actually discussed this last week. For the listeners that don't know, and you're the perfect person to answer this question,
Mm-hmm.
could you tell our listeners and enlighten me and Susan again on what's the difference between level 3 mental health and level 4 mental health?
Level 3 and level 4.
Yes.
Okay, so level 3 is when someone has like it's called an SPMI, like a serious persistent mental illness. So that's somebody who will typically have like bipolar, schizophrenia. They just have like a condition that kind of alters their ability to function in daily life. They'll typically be on some kind of like higher potent medication. The GDC likes to use Haldol, um, something like that. A mood stabilizer for like bipolar. Um, because they're on this kind of medication, um, you will you'll see they're slower to react. They're slower to be able to kind of function in GP. So the mental health team will typically recommend that they be raised to a level 3. Level 3s cannot be housed with level 2s, just for their safety. And so they're housed in a dorm by themselves. Um, and So that means they can't be in lockdown with any like other level 2 offenders. They have to have their own lockdown dorm and then their own like it's called a special living unit, like a SLU. And so that's a level 3. Now, a level 4 are those people who have more persistent, debilitating mental illnesses. They could still have like your schizophrenia, your bipolar, but it's just more debilitating. Typically what happens is the treatment team will meet and they'll say, look, this person's been at level 3, they're not functioning well, those kinds of things, and they'll get made a level 4. And those are the people that you see that are usually just spend all of their time in lockdown. They don't function well. They're having a lot of struggles with staff. they're being exploited, taken advantage of, those kinds of things. Or they're your like more like developmentally delayed people, will typically be made level 4. Go ahead.
No, and I guess, and I'll let you continue your point. Also, I think you told me as well that they can only be housed at certain facilities.
Yes. So level 3s and level 4s can only be housed at certain facilities. Level 3s, I don't remember now. I'm sorry. It's like my brain doesn't hold information well. But yes, level 3s can only be housed at certain facilities. Level 4s can only be housed at certain facilities. And like they cannot, level 3s and level 4s cannot do the tier program. They have their own special program. It's called the SHMU 2 program. And it has to be there has to be a whole packet of information that gets referred to Ron Duttlinger. It was Ron Duttlinger. I don't know if it is anymore, but it was Ron Duttlinger. And it gets sent to him, and he takes it to a panel of like people, and they decide if this person's appropriate for the SHMU 2 programs that are at Augusta and Phillips.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that is like the higher mental level tier program, so to speak, because they do have like lockdowns, but they're not just like thrown away. They have to get brought out and do groups, and it's a whole thing.
Right.
This has been fascinating. One of my good friends, her son is mental health 3 with both autism and developmental delays, and his first year was extremely difficult until he landed in a situation where people actually kind of looked out for him. Now he's got a work detail, and he's well liked there, and he's comfortable in his living situation. But there were things that happened that first year. He doesn't have words to describe things very well, and so it was very difficult for him to communicate what was going on that was impacting him greatly. But I'm so glad for her as his mother, and for him as well, that he's in a stable situation right now. But gosh, for a year, he didn't have, he wasn't even able to get his mother on his visitation or his finances or anything, because it was just too hard.
Right. Well, and that's a frustrating thing too, is like, because like some GP counselors are like, well, the form isn't filled out right, I'm not taking it. Or like, because the whoever enters that, if the forms aren't filled out correctly, then they just they say, well, the person who enters it isn't going to take this because it's not in the box right, or it is that we can't read it or whatever. So they just return them and say, we're not accepting these. And so like, if you have somebody who can't read or write well, they have to like find somebody to help them, or whatever the case may be. And so, because as a level 3 counselor, if I knew like the person struggled with those kinds of things, I would just take the time out to help them and say like, listen, I'm going to help you because you don't have the functionality to do it on your own.
Yeah.
And so those little things just go the extra mile.
Yeah, I think it would be far less traumatic for everybody if someone just sat down and said, here, let's help you for 30 minutes. We'll get it taken care of. And instead, he spent most of a year floundering
Right.
with various situations, and not being very verbal. He didn't have a lot of ways to communicate or even ask for help because of the lack of words to do it with.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to me to see that. I just had no idea until I got into this that 40% of the people who are incarcerated have some kind of mental health issues. And my son said, Mama, just being here will make you depressed.
Well, I have said I've worked in 2 prison systems in 2 states, and I have yet to meet an inmate that doesn't have some sort of trauma history.
Yeah. And then it doesn't make it any better. And, you know, we're going to move a little bit. You know, it doesn't make it any better with just the extreme drug use that we're seeing
Mhm.
in these prisons. And I think we had a question earlier in the chat about the drugs, but I guess I want both of you, Michael and Cleo, to touch on the drug use that's just crazy going through these prisons. Where, you know, and Cleo, you alluded to it with the strips and just the other drugs that's just running rapid. And you know, what type of effect have you guys saw with the drug use and stuff?
It created, for the times I experienced the most violence in that field, it was a direct result of either, you know, inmates trying to procure contraband that was, you know, illegal drugs, or it was, you know, from the use of the illegal drugs. Um, we had some guys, like I said, they were mental health, and there was some serious addiction problems there. Um, and some of those guys, you know, for the tons of violence we did encounter, they fought like hell because they didn't want to give up their drugs. And you know, as I remember just asking one guy, I was like, you know, dude, why are you fighting so hard on this one? I mean, you got caught with it. You know, he said, well, he said, because I know when y'all take it away from me, he said I'm gonna have to work that much harder, you know, to get my stuff back. Meaning his drugs. And
Right.
when I ended up going back through that facility, a few years after that, happened to run into him again, and he's like, you know what? He said, I don't even have to fight now. If they get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. And if they do take it, he said, I just go see. You know, he had a source where he could just readily go and get it again.
Well, and you know, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, it's
Yep.
just it went from being something that, you know, we're actively fighting to, I really feel like the staff at the GDC, I feel like they're, you know, it's a losing battle right now. I think they're ill-equipped. They're having to fight their own because there are dirty officers who are bringing it in. There's, you know, the contraband, the drones, all that other stuff. But right now they're fighting a losing battle because there's just not enough people, and the people that are there just are not reliable enough to make it a safe, secure facility. And I firmly believe that if they could have a, you know, an effective way to combat and treat the addictions that are there, we'd have a whole different system.
Yeah, and hold that point right there, because you know, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I've talked about that, and we're gonna touch on this a little bit more because I want to get Cleo's point on this. But you know, I said this a couple of weeks ago. You know, when we were doing a podcast, is that the GDC, you have so many addiction problems, and you know, they know that they have the addiction problems, and you know, we see the videos, or I see the videos, and I'm sure you guys do as well, where you see someone just completely sprung out on the strips, or you know, whatever drug, and they're just completely sprung out. You know, it's kind of disheartening because the GDC knows that all these drugs are in these facilities, and like you said, you know, they're fighting a losing battle right now because, you know, of other things that's in play. You know, but it's just disheartening that they don't have any type of substance abuse programs or anything that they are doing that try to get these people off of these drugs. And you know, that's a two-way street, because the people that's using them, you know, they have to be willing to want to stop using the drugs. And another thing that you said, you know, was spot on. You know, I've heard, and I know Susan has heard, that you know, if anybody wants drugs, I mean, they can go get drugs on credit before they can go get a pack of Roman noodle soups from anybody on credit. You know, it's just so, you know, it's just so much of it that, you know, they can go and get nonstop of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the problem is it's, I mean, strips is like a combination of cleaners. So it's not even that it's drugs. Like they make strips. So if they can't get drugs, they'll just make them. So that's the other problem too, is they've learned how to make their own drugs. So
Yeah,
that's
what
part
are one of the questions that someone asked us to ask, and I thought, wow, this is so insightful. His question was, everybody is concerned about drugs in the prisons, and you know, the institutionally they're concerned. The people out here are concerned. The people who are getting extorted are concerned. Their loved ones are drug sick. But how does I mean, Michael just said there are officers who are involved in this, and how does that affect the good guys, the clean people who aren't involved in bringing in drugs and generating cash flow or whatever it is that they're getting? Um, it, Everyone's concerned, but the good guys, everybody doesn't go over to the dark side. How do you, if you're not doing that, how do you look at your fellow officers or look at your uh, the people your colleagues, knowing that they're part of a serious problem?
you typically know who the dirty people are before other people know who the dirty people are. And so the problem is like, and you guys are probably aware that GDCs are like all DOC systems, they're very reactionary. So it's like, hey, oh, so and so is dirty. Like, and they'll know for a while, like other staff members, you'll know because you can just tell by the way someone moves and how they interact.
Mm-hmm.
But they have to like build their case, I guess. I don't know. And so it like, it just makes you leery, I guess. Yeah, but like when someone gets busted, you're like, oh, I want, like if you hear about somebody getting busted, at least for me, I'm not ever like, I'm like, oh, I'm not surprised. Like,
Yeah.
And, you know, and I guess we're saying all of this stuff, and we would almost make it think that we just don't know what we're talking about because the GDC doesn't talk about. You have to go to their website and dig and dig and dig to find, you know, what officers has been arrested for bringing in contraband. You don't even see that anymore. Now it's all about, you know, the drones that they are finding. And if you go to our Facebook page and you listen to those 911 calls that we posted last week, you know, I started, you know, halfway through those 911 calls, I was like, well, damn, y'all need to stop looking in the sky so much. It seems like y'all are looking more in the sky instead of, you know, watching a riot about to happen, you know, in a dorm.
mm-hmm.
But, you know, it would almost lead me to believe that, you know, the GDC wants the public to believe that officers are not bringing any contraband in. It's all drones.
And I would say that is, I mean, you know, as an agency is never going to air their dirty laundry.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, in just a few short years ago, they would air their dirty laundry because they wanted the public to know there was transparency.
Yeah.
But I think they've gotten away from that.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, they have they're 500,000 feet from any transparency.
oh,
Yeah.
I agree. I just why, you know, when I read stuff, I'm just like, how did it get here?
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
We used to hear about a wall of shame where there were pictures of the people who had been arrested. Do those still exist?
It
Yes.
did in December.
Okay.
It still does. I can say that at least in uh, the main facility in Lowndes County, it's right there on the wall as you go, you know, past main control onto the flat top. It's still there.
Another question that came from our listeners was, do do the COs turn a blind eye, or how do they turn a blind eye to the extortion of people in need, and to the beatings, to the dehumanization? That's the impression that the loved ones get. They must be turning a blind eye to it. Um, for me in my role here, I have been surprised at the emotional burden it is to me to know some of these things. I mean, I had never seen dead people, and I'd certainly never seen people get killed before. And all of this, the dehumanization, how does one cope with going from a normal life on the outside to this life where there's so much, so many things that are the result of the violence, the just, whether it's seeing the violence, but seeing the blood, the people being killed. How do you deal with it?
I'll let you go first, Michael.
I was on mute. I'll be very transparent with you. Therapy for one, medication for another, counseling, and I'm not being flippant. These are all things I've had to do because I have PTSD from working for those 12 years in that field. I have been beaten. I've had to go to the emergency room for injuries sustained on the job because I was trying to do what was right, either trying to keep somebody from hurting themselves or keeping somebody from hurting someone else, and got hurt in the process. Um, I can tell you that alcohol and substance abuse is more prevalent among officers than what you would imagine. Um, speaking from speaking from my own standpoint, towards the end of my career, I was drinking heavily to cope with the things that I had seen.
Michael, we're losing you just a little bit.
I'm sorry. Um,
No, you're fine.
I was just telling you that, there's things that from the encounters, I mean, you become numb, you become desensitized. Officers themselves, to some degree, they become institutionalized. Um,
Hmm.
and they don't want to admit it because it's us versus them. But the reality of it is, you're locked behind that fence with those guys too. Um, and you see it. And I know that there's officers who won't admit it, but if you're a human being, sometimes you still hurt when they hurt. When you see somebody that, even though they've done things that, they broke the law, they still deserve to be treated like a human being.
Hmm.
Um, they have a reasonable expectation to not be afraid they're going to be beaten by an inmate or a staff member just for looking at somebody the wrong way. Or that for what little belongings they have, that an officer is not going to go in their cell and make it look like a tornado hit a trailer park. Or that, they're not going to have what few possessions they have be stolen from them and extorted by other inmates.
Wait a minute. So are you telling me that actually does happen? Because I've seen a lot of messages from current inmates where they say the tax squad will come to their dorm, or CERT team will come to their dorm and purposely rip their property and their belongings, all to pieces, purposely just throw them all over the place. So you're telling me that actually happens?
this is the real world. If we're going to be transparent, I'm going to tell you, yes, that does happen.
Wow.
And I mean, it happens. There's things that happen, and so how do you cope with it? Um, I don't know, but I can tell you every not healthy coping mechanism I did. And I can tell you that from not working in that field anymore, um, there's things I don't do anymore. I don't drink heavily anymore. Um, but the PTSD is always going to be there. The nightmares, the things you've seen, they're always going to stay with you. Um, you talk about the fights and people either dying because of inmate on inmate violence or because they have, harmed themselves. There's some smells that never go away.
Mm-mm.
For having witnessed an inmate who killed himself, the smell of that blood never goes away.
Mm.
I will never forget the first time I saw someone die, and it was because the medical unit did not take his sick call request seriously that he was sick. Took him up there. Hey, he's sick. He needs to be seen. One nurse held him. The day watch nurse came in, sent him back to the dorm. He's faking. 2 days later, he was back in medical sick. And then I remember it on a Friday night, by midnight that Friday night, I mean, this guy, he had passed away because he didn't get medical treatment in time. And it was something that was totally treatable if they would have taken him seriously and given him the proper medication. He'd still be alive right now.
Cleo?
So a lot of what he said, I wasn't a CO, so I didn't have the like the extended exposure like he did, like Michael did. But so you just see a lot of like, so to speak onto Susan's question of like how do people treat other people that way, a lot of the things that I would see is, so you have officers that are couples out there, and so an inmate does something to the female, well the male gets mad and he retaliates against the inmate because you jacked on my girlfriend or you cussed at my girlfriend. So those kinds of things have happened. I've seen that happen. I mean, a plethora of things. Somebody just comes in and they're just not a good human, and this is a job for them. And so they are going to take their bad day out on this inmate. But those things are few and far between. But they do happen. So to say, how does somebody just stand by and like let violence happen? I think a lot of the violence now though is really happening for those simple cases, but also for the lack of staffing.
Mm-hmm.
There were
Well, they're too busy looking for drones too for the little staff that they do have.
Yeah, the little staff they do have, they're checking them drones. We had 2 pretty significant stabbings in the mental health dorm right before I left, and the inmates had to wheel those gentlemen up to medical on the ice cart. One passed away, one didn't. But there was no officer around, and like they get to medical and the unit manager's like, "What are you doing? Why are you here? Where's the officer?" And they're like, "There was no officer, like fix these guys." But yeah, I think a lot of it now is just lack of staff. And the staff that are there are just tired. Like, they're working, and you come in at 5 in the morning and your relief doesn't come in till 8 o'clock that night, 9 o'clock that night, and so you're just like, and you're like I said, you're doing the job at 8, and you're just like, you know what? I don't care that so and so doesn't have a cell to sleep in. He can sleep on the day room floor. I don't care. The facility that I worked at, you would go and pull up the scribe and it would say that inmate Smith was assigned to A13. A1, A1, dorm building 1A, side 1, bed 3, whatever, and he wouldn't be in there because nobody like makes sure that they're in the bed they're assigned to in the computer. You would just have to go to that door or that building and say, "Hey, I need to see Airman," or not Airman, sorry, new job, Inmate Smith. Inmate Smith. And then he'd come out of whatever room he's living in, because it didn't matter what the computer said. It's where you got to live when you got there.
And something else too, that you're touching on that. And I know it's getting late, and I'm gonna let y'all go just a second. But since you're touching on that, I know you saw the pictures that we posted about a month ago, where you see all the people sleeping in the day rooms and all of that stuff. Does that stuff actually happen, where people are being extorted and can't sleep in cells and that they're assigned to, or somebody doesn't want them in that cell, so they end up having to sleep in the day room? Does that stuff happen?
So it depends, like with whoever so it's going to depend on the officer, because some officers are like, you lock down or you're getting out. Like, you better be in a cell at lockdown, or you're on the door. Like, and then it depends also, like, on the night shift unit manager. So if that unit manager is doing his rounds and doing his checks, he's going to go in that building and he's going to see, like, okay, everyone's in a cell, everyone's where they're supposed, maybe not in the assigned cell they're in, but no one's in that day room sleeping. Everyone's in a cell. All these doors are locked. There might be 3 people in a cell and 1 person in one cell, but there's nobody in the day room. There's, nobody sleeping in a mock closet.
Yeah.
So I can't speak, like I said, I can't speak to how it was. Like, I could speak to how it was in the mental health dorm I worked, and I don't think people were sleeping in the day room in that dorm. I can't speak for the other dorms, but if the unit manager is doing his job and the lieutenants are doing their job and they're doing them checks, then they're going to see, like, nobody sleeping in day rooms.
Right. So we see those pictures, and it goes back to what you're saying. Obviously somebody wasn't doing their job, because if somebody was doing their job, those people wouldn't be sleeping in the day room.
Right.
And these are the people that the unit managers and stuff. These are the people that get promoted to wardens and unit, whatever the other one is that they after the warden.
Yeah, commissioners and
Yeah.
Deputy commissioners and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
There was one more question that I was going to ask you guys before I was going to let you go, but I can't remember. So, Susan, I'll let you close us out if you got anything else.
I do. To both of you, I thank you so much. This has just been a fascinating hour and 15 minutes. I thank you so very much for your openness and willingness to talk about some things that are difficult and are often even denied. And it's just been fascinating, and I thank you. I want to say to our listeners tonight, if you like what you've heard, help us continue to get this message out there. The things we're talking about here tonight are kind of the ugly truth about our Georgia Department of Corrections. These guests tonight have no reason at all to exaggerate or do anything other than speak to their own experiences. And it has been fascinating and sad. I just thank you both for your openness with us tonight and willingness to sit on the hot seat and take a lot of questions. I just thank you all. I have an announcement to everyone who's listening. I've had a question today from a person in the press who is working on a story about the shackling of women during labor and delivery in Georgia prisons and in Georgia jails. If you have any knowledge of that, contact me, please, and I'll hook you up with the journalist who's working on that. Georgia passed a law, I believe, in 2020, prohibiting the shackling of women in labor and delivery. So that is being followed up on. Good to hear that it is. Again, everybody, you would share what you've heard here tonight and donate. You've seen the Chiron going past with the donation information, and our contact information is there as well. If there's anything more you'd like to for us to talk about, reach out to Brian or to me. Again, I'm Susan Sparks Burns, Brian Randolph with Human and Civil Rights Coalition of Georgia. And I just thank you all for being here tonight, and especially our guests. Yes.
Hold on a second. I want to do something a little different here on the fly.
Okay.
If Michael or Cleo, if y'all have any closing remarks, we'll let y'all have those, and we'll go out of here with y'all to say anything that y'all want to say as we close out. And we definitely 100% appreciate you guys jumping on with us tonight. Sorry about the little technical difficulties that we had there at the beginning, but like I said, the floor is y'all's if y'all want to have any closing remarks before we go.
Cleo, you can go first if you'd like to.
Oh, okay. I just want to thank you guys for having us, and thanks for your work. If you that you guys are doing, I think it's a much needed. And I just thank you guys for everything. It's a good cause, and there are a lot of people, a lot of inmates that do bad things, but that doesn't make them bad people. So I just appreciate your work. So if you, Brian, you have my number. So if you need anything, just reach out to me. Or if, you have any more questions, just feel free to reach out to me.
Well, as you know, and we talked about an hour, and I have a list of a whole list of pages. Well, not a whole list of pages. I have a whole list of things that I didn't even get to. So we'll probably have you back on because there's some more questions that I need to ask you, but I definitely thank you for coming on.
That's fine. Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, just thank you so much for having me. Thank you for allowing me to share. And echoing what Cleo said, thank you for your work that you're doing. And I would definitely say keep doing it, no matter what anybody says. And I encourage folks to press the leadership of the GDC because regardless of why the inmate is there, they deserve fair and equal treatment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank y'all for we're way over our hour, but we were a little late coming on, so we definitely appreciate everyone joining us tonight. If you have any questions, if you want us to bring anybody on or something that a burning question that just didn't get answered, you can message myself or Susan or Human Civil Rights and Coalition and ask your question, and we'll ask them and we'll get your answer back. So definitely thank both of our guests for coming on tonight, and thanks everybody for just for listening with us tonight. And until next Thursday, this has been the Georgia Prison Watch podcast, and we definitely appreciate everybody coming on.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.